In this video, we're going to talk about the second question that we answer in a band meeting. What are your struggles and your successes? And sometimes it can be difficult to articulate our struggles or admit that something's been really hard or difficult, but we are encouraged to remember God's promise to us in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, where he says that my power is made perfect in your weakness.
Yeah, so when we share around this question, we're not just aiming to, talk about what our struggles are, but we're also going to talk about our successes. And sometimes that's difficult and vulnerable too, because it feels like, well, if I talk about what's going really well or successful in my life, it might seem like I'm bragging on myself. But we believe that there's actually great grace and great honesty in being able to be honest about our strengths and our weaknesses, what's going well, what is success, and what we're struggling with. Rick Warren in The Purpose-Driven Life, he said that humility is not putting yourself down or denying yourself, denying your strengths. Rather, it's being honest about your weakness. And the more honest you are, the more of God's grace that we often experience. And I think we have lived that out in this question. Sometimes when I'm going to answer this question, I just think to myself, what is going well and what is not going well? And then I just attempt to sort of talk around that. And oftentimes, I don't know if this is the case in your band, Anna Grace, but in my band, this is sort of the question that you spend the most time answering, because it's sort of the life question.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the life question for sure. I feel like each day I could have a list of struggles and successes. And so something that's been really helpful, just even in knowing what should I share with my band so that I don't spend the whole 20 minutes, talking about these questions, is to think of my answers to these questions in 3 categories. The first being family and relationships. Not that any of us ever have any struggles in our families or in our relationships with one another, but also learning to celebrate successes in those as well. The second is vocation, calling, and purpose. The third is ourselves. How am I doing in my relationship with myself and my inner thought life? How am I talking to myself? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, for me, oftentimes I've begun to sort of assess what I'm aiming at in my life. So whether it be nutrition or exercise or getting time in the Word or praying, I kind of am taking an internal assessment of how am I doing on those things that I'm actually aiming at as a husband, as a father, as a disciple of Jesus. So when I talk about myself, I tend to talk around those things that for me are my own goals. Same thing with work life. As I talk about struggles and successes in work life, if I don't know what I'm aiming at, I might have a hard time talking about those things. But this is sort of that opportunity where you're basically really week in, week out, you're really getting to know one another because you're talking about family and relationships. You're talking about your work life. You're talking about your own sort of assessment of how you're doing. And as you hear that over time, you're developing a sort of composite sketch of a person's life, which may not in a week or 2 weeks or a month mean that much, but over 6 months or a year or 3 years or 4 years, you actually have week in, week out, held someone's story in the space between you. It gives incredible insight as you're praying over someone, as you're encouraging someone, that you sort of know what's going on in them in that kind of way. So for me, this question is it's the storytelling question. It's the place where you're going to get the most material to just love someone well.
Absolutely. I know I've definitely been loved well by my band in this question. Sometimes, we mentioned this earlier, it can be hard to identify successes and we feel weird articulating them. And so there have been times when I've been sharing something and I've forgotten maybe something that I've shared in a past band meeting, that one of my bandmates says, "Hey, Anna Grace, do you remember, however many months ago, you were talking about this, and now we're seeing this," and it becomes this beautiful just celebration and community of an answered prayer or something that God has done in my life.
Absolutely. The goal, of course, as we're growing together in grace, is that we actually get to celebrate, look how far you've come, look at what God's doing, and we often find that in this question.